This is Fred's shirt. This is Ray William Johnson's. And this is mine. Quantities are limited. More information in the description section of this video. Hey there, Philo71, it's me, your old pal, the Amazing Atheist. You made a video called, Hey Atheist, You Don't Know.
I know what you're thinking. It's an inflammatory and even arrogant title. Hey Atheist, You Don't Know.
And you say Christians don't know either, which is a fair thing for you to say, because, yeah, you're right, you don't.
I can also say, hey Christian, you don't know either. There are a lot of things that we don't know, but this is not what I'm hitting upon.
But then you go on and act like you do know, so I guess that was just one of those typical statements of false humility that you Christians are so very, very fond of.
When it comes to the spiritual realm, atheist, you have the habit of talking as if spirituality is in a box of naturalism. Spirituality needs to be in a box of the material world that you understand to be so, or else it cannot make sense. But wait a minute. You are measuring the chicken with the yardstick. You're comparing two things that are incompatible here.
I guess the first major point of your video is that God exists outside of nature. Now, I read and listen to a lot of atheist thinkers. Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris. I don't really listen to Daniel Dennett too much. But I do like people like Victor J. Stenger, who's a little bit more off the radar, Dan Barker. I also like some atheistic thinkers who are no longer with us, like Friedrich Nietzsche or Bertrand Russell or very recently George Carlin. You know, I've read or listened to a lot of their works and I've heard a lot of their interviews, but I haven't really heard too many of them address this. Richard Dawkins, when he's asked about this God that exists outside of nature or outside of time, he just kind of says, oh, that's a cop-out. Isn't that just convenient? Isn't that this nice, convenient little cop-out? That's pretty much his entire argument against it, and really that's the only argument that one should have to levy against it, because it is, in fact, a complete cop-out. But I thought that I would provide a few more substantive points against this idea that God exists outside of nature. And I think before we even do that, we have to acknowledge that the whole reason that you Christians are saying that God exists outside of nature is because we human beings have looked at nature and we've seen no sign of God. Everything that you guys said God did, it turns out that He didn't do it. The first thing I have to say to this idea that God exists outside of nature is that nature encompasses everything. Everything that we know. Everything here on Earth, everything on Alpha Centauri, everything out in all of the other galaxies with billions upon billions of stars per galaxy. Everything in this universe, perhaps everything in this multiverse, if you believe in multiverse theory, it is all, every little ounce of it, it is all nature. So to say that something exists outside of nature is to basically say that something does not exist, because nature and existence are synonymous. Another problem that I have with this idea that God exists outside of nature is that it's not falsifiable. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis of which there are infinite variations. I could just as easily say, hey, I believe in Zeus. And, you know, you go to Mount Olympus and say, hey, where the fuck is Zeus? And I say, well, he exists outside of nature, outside of time, outside of anything measurable. And that brings me to point number 3, that this is only a deist argument. It's not a theist argument. You're arguing for the existence of a God. You make this argument and say, hey, there is a God and He exists outside of time and He exists outside of nature. And then you just act as though it must be the Christian God. Making an argument for a God is not the same thing as making an argument for your God. My fourth point, and I think that this is probably the most important of all the points that I want to make, is why. would God exist outside of nature? The only reason for God to exist outside of nature is so that Christians can point out that God exists outside of nature whenever it seems like God doesn't exist in nature. There's no reason for God to exist outside of nature. If God is the creator of nature, which he certainly is if he exists, because that is a prerequisite for being God, then why would he be apart from it? Which brings me to point number 5. God is supposedly omnipresent. He is in all things at all times. That means that he is in this room. He is in this camera. He is in my heart, my head, my butt, everything. God is there. So if God is intrinsically present at all places, at all times, then how can he be separate from nature? And let's say God is outside of nature. Well, then that begs the question, how can he interact with nature? If God is made of wholly different stuff than anything that exists in nature, then how is it that he is able to manipulate nature? And that brings me to the final point, which is that even if God doesn't exist in nature, you're making the claim that he still does stuff to affect nature. He is involved in nature. He created nature, and every once in a while he intercedes. So let's imagine that this room that I'm in right now symbolizes all of existence. And I decide that I find it to be a miserable existence, and while you're sleeping on the floor in here, I take a gun and I blow my brains out. And the bullet travels through my head and out the wall and out into non-existence. The bullet no longer exists. You wake up, you look at me, you see the hole in my head, and you're able to discern from that evidence that a bullet must have passed through my head. Now this bullet no longer exists. It's outside of nature, which is symbolized by this room. Yet you see its effects. The effects are measurable. So whether God exists in nature or outside of nature, his existence is still a scientific question. Because if God exists and he is the creator of nature and he interferes with nature on a somewhat regular basis, then we should be able to measure his effect. And if we can measure his effect, we can prove that he existed. Just like you could prove that the bullet that traveled through my head and killed me existed. Even though it no longer exists. Even though it is outside of nature. Now, the second point in your video is that belief is not geographic.
I've seen Richard Dawkins use this example over and over and over again. And the Dawkinites here on YouTube follow him right on. They gobble it all up. And what is it? It's that question. You're just a Christian because you were born here. A Muslim is a Muslim because he was born in a Muslim country, and so forth and so on.
The problem with this is obvious. Belief is geographic. It absolutely is geographic. 78% of Americans are Christians, whereas 99% of Iraqis are Muslims. No exaggeration there. So either there is a clear geographic corollary for religion, or this is as statistically unlikely as getting 6 million blue M&Ms in a row. Now you do offer up some evidence to bolster your claim and show how geography doesn't have anything to do with religion, but all of your examples are these really bizarre exceptions to the rule. You talk about these Muslims who suddenly decide that they're going to become Christians and they convert right then and there. Yeah, that does happen, but that's just anecdotal evidence and it's not bolstered by the statistics.
When they began saying, you know, there's something here about Allah, about the Quran that just bothers me. And when they got on their knees and said, God, whatever Allah, can you reveal to me the truth behind this?
And you act as though they only happen in favor of Christianity. Now that would be truly weird, but there are plenty of people who suddenly decide to become Muslims. I had a friend who lived in Canada, which is a country that has a 74% Christian population and a 2% Muslim population. And he was white. He grew up in white neighborhoods. He did not have a lot of exposure to Islam, and yet one day he decided he was Muslim. This happens, and it happens both ways. You know, there's no magical spell at work here that ensures that a Muslim can become a Christian, but a Christian can't become a Muslim. People are converted all the time from both sides. But they don't do it en masse. It's always these isolated little incidents, these pockets of change.
For example, one story is one particular group member of the Jesus film was out in the market. He was touched on the shoulder by a man. When he turned around, the man said, "You know, I don't know who you are, but I had a dream last night as I was seeking the truth of the creator of heaven and earth. I had a dream last night that where I was asking Allah, I was asking God, the creator, would you reveal yourself to me in a personal way that I have not had yet? And this creator said, you will have the answer tomorrow. A person wearing a blue coat will tell you of the Messiah that I sent for all of mankind."
Well, I'm wearing a blue-collared shirt. If he'd run into me the next day, he'd be an atheist right now. You know, how many dreams do people have like that? How many dreams do people have that say, oh, if you see this, this will happen? And then, you know what? 95% of the time, they don't see the sign they're supposed to see, and they say, oh, it must have been a dream. But then that other 5% of the time, they do see the sign they were supposed to see, and they say, hey, this must be a truth, a revelation. No, idiot, you just had a dream. Dreams don't mean shit. They don't give you some kind of window to the future or the past or to the stars or astral projection. They might help you understand your own psyche a little bit, but no information is being transmitted to you in dreams from elsewhere. I think that's been pretty concretely proven by science. Then you ended up talking about an entire village who had a dream about this actor from this film that they saw the next day. And they say, oh, we had a dream, and we dreamed this actor would lead us to the truth. And this actor was playing Jesus or something. And he led them to Christianity in the entire village, just on the spot. Conversion to Christianity. No questions asked. The dream and the movie were enough for them.
One case is, and there's a video on the website right now, of villages that have never heard of Christ, where they would have to interrupt the showing of the film in the middle because the people there started crying. And the tribe leader said, some of us had dreams last night of a man walking in the middle of our tribe, of our village, and he looked just like that actor in that film. And God told us in the film that this man that we're going to see in the near future was going to be the Messiah, whom we had to give our lives over to him. These villages are giving their lives to Jesus Christ. Now,
well, I could just say that this story is bullshit and that it's made up, but even assuming it's true, so what? So fucking what? Every religion claims to have miracles. Islam claims to have miracles. This mosque survived the tsunami in India. Everything else around it was destroyed, but this mosque still stands. Okay, maybe that's not a miracle. Maybe the mosque was just built better than everything else around it. What about these 40 Muslims? These 40 Sufi Muslims all saw, in a brilliant, blinding display of light, the name of Muhammad appear atop the ceiling of the holy building that they were occupying at that time. If all it takes for you to be convinced of the validity of something is a miracle, then you need to go join Islam. Or you know what, you could go become a Hindu because they have miracles too. Every religion has miracles. Every religion has these mass miracles where dozens or hundreds of people claim to see something amazing. So let me ask you about these Muslims. What is the most likely explanation? Are they all liars? Did the devil come and trick their minds and make them think they saw the name of Muhammad on the ceiling? The only other explanation is that these 40 people were deceived by their own brains. Maybe they saw something, and then one person said, oh, it's the name of Muhammad, and then everyone else saw it too. Maybe that's what happened in your case with the village, who all had the same dream. Maybe a very influential person in the village declared that they had had that dream. They had a case of deja vu suddenly, and they decided, I've seen this before, must have been in a dream, and they stand up and declare it, I have seen this in a dream! And a bunch of other people wanting to fit in stand up and say, I saw it in a dream too! That's very possible, and it's very plausible as well. If all of these miracles were taking place in one single religion, if all of the miracles happen in Christianity, or all of the miracles happen in Hinduism, or all of the miracles happen in Islam, then maybe that religion would bear a greater degree of scrutiny. Maybe people should start to examine these miracles and say, hey, maybe there's something to this. But since they are culturally invariable, they happen in every culture in support of every major world religion, I think that we can ignore them as a physical phenomena, something that is caused by the brain. I think that is a fairly safe thing to do. which is why miracles don't mean shit. I'm the Amazing Atheist. Thank you for listening. Peace the fuck out.